Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, both in person and to those that are joining us for the first ever live streaming Tanbark Talk. My name is Lori Fetzer. I am the Managing Director of Dairy Lending at Compeer Financial, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to be one of the first people to officially welcome you to the 2024 World Dairy Expo. I've been with Compeer Financial and part of the farm credit system, working with dairy farmers for over 20 years. And I've dedicated my life to the dairy industry. In fact, in addition to my role at Compeer, my husband's family owns a dairy farm in western Wisconsin where we milk 1,500 cows and we're cropping around 3,000 acres. I know how busy this time of year can be for all of us, but I also know what an exciting event like World Dairy Expo is for everyone who shares a passion for agriculture in the dairy industry. It is a week of meaningful conversations, education, listening, and learning, and showcasing the latest solutions that benefit all of us in our operations. That is why Compeer Financial is proud to sponsor multiple events at World Dairy Expo, including this morning's Tanbark Talk. As a cooperative, Compeer Financial is dedicated to serving the agricultural community, and we're committed to supporting the success of dairy farmers. We understand the unique challenges and opportunities within the dairy industry, and we're committed to providing the financial solutions and support that dairy farmers and rural business owners need. Today, we are here to discuss a topic that is top of mind for so many within the agriculture and dairy industry: transition planning. As farms grow in complexity and the challenges of succession planning becomes increasingly multifaceted, the need for thoughtful and strategic transition planning has never been more critical. Transition planning isn't just about transferring ownership. It's about ensuring the long-term sustainability and success of your family's operation. It involves a comprehensive assessment of your farm's financial health, operational efficiency, and future goals. It requires careful consideration of family dynamics, estate planning, and the transfer of knowledge and skills to the next generation. So to help break down these complex topics this morning, we've assembled a panel of transition experts to hear their firsthand experiences in assisting a successful multi-generation dairy operation navigate its way through a 10-year transition plan. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panel for this morning's discussion. The Oechsner family. First, allow me to introduce the Oechsner family. Here with us today is Dennis, co-owner of Oechsner Farms, a dairy operation in Leroy, Wisconsin, along with his wife Jeni and his nephew Alan. Oechsner Farms is a seventh-generation farm caring for dairy cattle and growing corn and silage, wheat, high oil, soybeans, and alfalfa. Dennis and his brother Dave, nephew Alan, nephew-in-law Tony, and long-term employee Travis all farm together. Their wives, including Jeni, play an integral part in the farm as well, along with their assistant herdsman and feeding and milking team. This multi-generational farm leverages each person's skills, the latest technologies and knowledge passed down from those who came before to run such a successful business. They are currently in year 4 of a 10-year transition of ownership. Next is Steve Schwoerer. Steve is a senior dairy lending specialist at Compeer. His primary role is to provide dairy expertise and advice to some of Compeer's largest dairy farm clients. He has been an account officer for dairy clients in the farm credit system for just shy of 38 years. Steve graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. He is a member of Professional Dairy Producers and the Wisconsin Dairy Business Association. Next is Jared Holt. Jared is the president and CEO of Ascent Financial, one of Compeer's trusted farm transition planning partners, and he acts as the director of consulting. Jared and his team at Ascent Financial are industry partners along with Compeer in advising clients with the complexities of their transition planning process. He has a bachelor's degree in finance from Minnesota State University of Mankato. Jared enjoys working with his clients to help them transition their farm and business, something most clients have devoted their lifetime to building. And last but not least is Peggy Coffeen. Peggy Coffeen has dedicated the past 15 years to sitting across the tables with dairy farmers around the country, asking questions, telling their stories, and connecting them to resources. She is the founder and host of the Up-Level Dairy podcast and the Up-Level Dairy Young Leaders podcast. She also serves as the dairy and livestock editor for the AgriView newspaper previously, before she was spending 9 years as an editor and podcast host for Progressive Dairy. Before handing it off to Peggy, I would like to thank the panelists for the participation in this exciting session and thank all of you for attending. Thank you. Peggy?
All right, thank you, Lori, and good morning to everyone here that's joining us in person, live from World Dairy Expo, right here on the Tanbark, and those that are tuning in virtually. And so, as Lori had mentioned in her introduction, I'm Peggy Coffeen, and a little bit about my background and why this topic is so special and near and dear to my heart is I grew up on a family farm. Who else in here grew up on a family farm or is part of a family farm right now? Yeah, so many of us. And my family farm is actually about 30 minutes south of here in Greene County in a little town called Monticello. And has anybody ever been down there, a little bit south of here? Now, what you might know about Monticello is that I would call this the land of the little red barn. So there's these beautiful rolling hills and these beautiful little red barns. And as a kid, I can't say I was born in the barn, but I definitely grew up in one. And I'm guessing some of you did too. But as I've gotten older and more appreciative of that little red barn, one thing that always amazed me about it was the architecture. And to really think about that structure and what it took to make it last for 125 years. And so if you ever really looked at how a barn is built, this is a little bit of how it all starts. So back in the day, this is what families would do, is when they would clear the fields in the spring for planting, they would start to collect the rocks and they would put them aside. And those rocks, this was not just picking rocks. This was picking rocks with a purpose, all right? Because those rocks that they would pick would become the foundation for the barn that they would build in between the planting and the harvest season. And so they'd start collecting these rocks. And in that season, they would then start to build a foundation, placing each rock carefully to build something strong enough to last. And now the next step in building that old barn was to put together the beams and the bends, and to put together the walls, to create the structure, to create the frame that would support this barn and this family for the long term. And then what would happen is when it came time to put the walls up around that barn, this was a project that was bigger than the family alone. Even our best Catholic families in Greene County could not raise it themselves without the help of their neighbors. They didn't have enough kids to raise it, so they had to call in some reinforcements. And so they would take their team that they assembled and they would put the walls up around these barns. And those barns are the same ones that you can still see in the countryside today. But if you look closely to that original structure, what you may also notice is that even though that original barn was once built many times 100 and some years ago, they didn't stop building. They built additions, they built wings, they built a lean-to here and a lean-to there, and before you know it, you had what you can see today, a farmstead that was built and expanded for each stage, each generation, to diversify, to bring in another family member, to do something different. And that's what created the foundation of not just that barn as it once was, but of the barns that still stand today. And when you really think about what it took to build those barns, it's a lot like transition planning that we're going to be talking about this morning. It starts with the foundations, with those rocks that were picked and collected. And that foundation was part of a bigger plan. So you started planning early, collecting the rocks, building the foundation. And from that foundation, it was putting together the framework and the structure. And the next step was putting up the walls, surrounding yourself with the people on the team that could raise the walls. And go one step further with that. Just as many of those same farmsteads built and grew over those years, transition plans tend to do the same thing. The ones that last for the long haul are the ones that keep building, that may change, that may have to get torn down and started all over again. And that's what we're here to talk about today, this topic of family farm transition planning. And no, it's not an easy one. It's complex. It can be complicated. There's a lot of emotions and legacy and history that's attached to our family farms. But that's why we're here, is to start to break down some of that complexity. And the way that we're going to do that today is with the generosity of the Oechsner family and the experts that they have surrounded themselves with to be able to raise their walls and build a barn that will last and expand and grow as their family and their legacy continues to expand and grow. And so with that, I'll introduce you again to our panelists and have them share a little bit about their expertise today. And to my left, your right here, we have Jared Holt from Ascent Financial. And Jared, could you please take a moment and tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and how you serve farm families in the transition planning process?
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Jared Holt with Ascent Financial, as Peggy said, and we spend our days on family farms across the United States working to help propel to the next generation. We build it brick by brick, and it's the best thing in the world other than farming.
Excellent, Jared. And I'm going to jump down to Steve Schwoerer from Compeer Financial as another trusted advisor to this process. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and how your expertise plays a role in transition plannings for families like the Oechsners and others?
Well, as Lori mentioned before, I've been with the Farm Credit System for 38 years, so I've seen all different spectrums of transition planning. Back in the 80s, the transition plan was all about more gifting, and it was easier to transition assets with the asset values the way they are right at that time. Nowadays, we're seeing asset values of land, buildings, cattle, just tremendous inventory values. What was $1 million and $2 million of assets back in the 80s is now 10, 20, 30, $40 million of assets, and that just doesn't happen overnight. You have to have a more comprehensive plan. So in my 38-year career with Compeer, I've seen all different spectrums, but it really started back with the Oechsner family back in 2007. At that time, Compeer Financial decided to split the portfolio out and create a specialized dairy team. So I was part of that dairy team, and so my workings deal with basically all dairy farmers and what we consider larger dairy farmers, but actually for transition planning purposes, it doesn't necessarily need to be a dairy farm. The transition plan that the Oechsners went through could apply to any type of operation as well. But in 2007, when I first started working with the Oechsners, it was kind of unique because at that time they had just got the farm transitioned to them from their father, and they'll explain that story too in a unique situation. And so it basically was literally in 2018 or 19, so almost like only 12 years later, they were then thinking about transitioning the farm to the next generation. Usually you see a 20 or 30-year gap in between there, but in this case it was pretty close, which is really a credit to them because they did this well enough in advance. So that's one of the common themes we'll talk about in the transition plan is giving the plan enough time.
Thank you, Steve, for your introduction and for you explaining the relationship that you have with this family that's joining us on stage. And in just a moment, I'm going to have Dennis tell us a little bit more about your story. But I do want to call attention to those of you that are in the audience and that there is a little table tent that's in front of you right now. And that's where you can find a QR code that you can scan. And when you do that, you are able to actually get access to this full video recording after World Dairy Expo. That'll be sent right to you. So make sure you take a moment to go ahead and scan that so you can get access to this full video. And for those of you that have questions, whether it's online or in person, we will have opportunities for you to address those questions to our experts and our family here as we go throughout the presentation in some designated times. So jot down those questions, look forward to that, and I'm going to divert back over to Dennis. Tell us a little bit about your story, a little bit about your family farm, and how this process all started for you.
Well, good morning. Yes, how it all kind of began, I guess, is our dairy, our farm, going to be, it's a sixth generation, and with Alan and the next generation coming in, we're looking at 7 generations. Growing up on a family farm, I've said it in the past, I had the honor of working with 4 generations, my great-grandparents, grandparents, my dad, and myself. And at the time when you're young, I guess you kind of take that all for granted. You don't think a whole lot about that until you get older and you realize that was pretty cool. As time went on, you just see the differences in generations about, how back in those days, how conservative it was for, your grandparents, and then your dad had my dad. He was a little more progressive, and he wanted to expand the farm, and that kind of led into me and my brother growing from there. We currently, as we said, we milk 600 cows. We grow about 2,200 acres of crops on the farm, and with the next generation coming in, we're planning on an expansion here, where it's in the talking stages right now. So we're hopeful that all of that is gonna materialize here, and we're looking forward to that.
Thank you for sharing a snapshot, Dennis, of where you and your family are at in this process. And if you don't mind, I'd like you to take us back a little bit into your history and your story with your family farm. You mentioned that you had the unique opportunity to have 4 generations on the farm at once. But there was also some things that happened when you became owner of the farm with your brother as well. Some unexpected things, some challenges that you faced. Would you like to share a little bit about that piece of your farm and its story?
Well, my brother went through a divorce, unfortunately, and it caused a little strain on the farm at the time. And we kind of were looking, after we had purchased the farm, how to protect ourselves, going forward in the event of that. I had my mother, when we did farm, my mother had MS, and it was a struggle, growing up. I get too emotional here, but she was a matriarch to the farm. Kind of kept the farm, I would say, together. It is when you're farming with your parents, it can be a challenge, and as I said before, generational gaps. When you're farming with multi-generations, it can be a little strenuous, I should say. But my mother passed. She died in a car accident in 2006, and my dad owned a farm at the time, and me and my brother were renting from him. And he kind of speeded things up, like after my mom passed away, he's like, I think I want to sell the farm. And at that time, it was like he went to the lawyer and he drew up the papers and he said, I'm selling the farm, and that's what it's going to be. Well, me and my brother kind of were, okay, I guess it's time that we take over the family business. And we were ready to do it. It was a lot simpler doing it than what we're going through right now, and we knew that going in, that it wasn't going to be that easy turning that over to the next generation, especially when you deal with the assets that you have created over time. So.
Yeah, and thank you, Dennis, for sharing that deeply personal story about kind of the background behind your own transition into being the owner of the farm with your brother back in 2006. And that, I know you had shared with our team up here in the past, was that really prompted you to be proactive with how you wanted to see your farm transition forward, the experience that you wanted the next generation of your family to have, of you and your brother, and not just your children, but even an outside partner that has ended up coming into the business. And so I just want us to, just take a moment and be in gratitude for you sharing that, and in appreciation for understanding where your proactive sense comes from in this transition planning process. And that, I think, is where we can pivot to the importance of starting early, because you didn't have a lot of time to figure things out when you were transitioned the farm. But at a relatively young age compared to many farmers, you started having these conversations. And so I'm going to divert over to Steve for what that looked like, those early conversations that you and Dennis and this family had, and what came of those conversations. How did that start, that early planning process?
Well, first of all, basically the idea, we just started having a conversation. So usually that's the hard part, just having somebody be open to listening to having that conversation. I knew at the time there was next generation that were involved in the operation that were interested, and they weren't exactly sure what this all looks like. Either weren't exactly sure what ownership and managing a farm we would look like. They were working on the farm and just decided that they wanted to have some ownership and to have some skin in the game. So we just started to have the conversation. I always like to just let my clients know that there's what options are out there. So I basically gave the Oechsner family a list of people that I thought would be great to start the conversation with. I also told them that this should be a team effort. You just can't talk to an attorney or about that. You got to talk to your tax consultant. Have me involved because we need to make sure this works financially as well too. So basically just a conversation started. I gave them a list of names and options of some professionals to go talk to, of which Ascent Financial was one of those. And I think the family was really open to the idea up front. Again, going back to your experiences of how you received the farm in a transition, I think you made the comment to me once that you wanted to make sure that the next transition that you would take place in with the next generation would be much more complicated, more well thought out. And again, at that time, we knew there'd be a longer process. But we had time on our side. I think you were probably in your early mid 50s at that time. That's usually, it's great to think about that well in advance. A lot of people don't think about that till they're in their 60s or 70s. And if there's that bit of advice I'd give to everybody is to think about this soon enough, and because time is your friend, time is on your side. And I think just conversation has led into the idea of you talking to the next generation members. They were open to it, and again, just basically the conversation started, and then it evolved after that.
And when we talk about starting those conversations, when it comes to other families that are out there that you're working with, Steve, or you're working with Jared, what is the best place to start? Sometimes starting is that hardest step. So what's your advising for the best way to start those conversations?
Honestly, the best way to start, I think, is to start having discussions internally, coming to events like this, getting educated on what a transition plan entails, making sure that everybody in the family and the business is ready to start the process. We have a saying that, if people are not ready to go down this path, you can't force them, you can't push them. They have to be willing to go through it. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes a lot of work. The Oechsners got started at a very young age, I would say, relatively speaking, like you said, and that has allowed them a lot more of opportunities to improve the plan, enhance the plan, and do it over many years versus all at once. I think that, with the Oechsners starting as early as they have, you guys have been able to walk into it and develop it under your own terms, not in a time of crisis or in financial uncertainty, or when you guys are in a big argument. You guys were getting along. You were ready. That's the time to do it. There's no perfect time to start a transition plan. People always ask that question. Oftentimes, the best time to start it, if you have kids coming in the business or looking to get into the business, oftentimes a good starting point is if they're in middle school, to be honest, because they start getting to high school and they start asking, what does it look like for me to come back to the farm? And you want to be able to tell them what that looks like, what that vision is. And you guys built the rules for entering the business. Oechsners built that out. And even the successors, as we've been building this transition plan, they're already thinking about their next generation coming in. How old is the oldest kid of you guys? 13? Well, doesn't Travis have a 16-year-old? So, now is the time to start for the successors to be communicating a message to the next generation. And so earlier the better is our motto.
And the thing to understand is too is that there's no right or wrong in transition planning. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not fill in the blank. It's whatever you want the plan to look like. So you tailor the plan to how you want it to look like, and that's why starting early allows you that opportunity to do that. It's just not every operation is unique. Every transition plan is unique, but it's really more about what you want and not what everybody else has done in the past also.
And just one more thing with that. You could relate to this, Steve, but just because you start the transition planning process doesn't mean you're retiring. You were working this morning, weren't you, Dennis?
Yes, I
right,
was.
Jenny? You're not done. You got a couple years.
They don't let us leave yet.
Exactly.
They still want us yet.
So it's there's we like to say there's still two hands on the baton through this transition plan for many, many, many years. Just keep that in mind when people start the process.
And a couple of keywords that have come up in what Jared and Steve have just shared. Steve was talking about the word plan. Jared was talking about the word vision. And what that speaks to is the different stages in a process. And within different stages are different people and different consultants that construct a team. Steve, you touched on this a little bit, but Dennis, I would like you and your family to expand more upon how you built your transition team. Who did you surround yourself with to help create that vision, clarify it, and then put that plan into place?
Well, originally, if you want to go right to one way, it first started, me and my brother, we had this conversation numerous times as far as, looking back in history of how it went with, again, going back to my grandparents and great-grandparents. My grandfather, I forgot to mention, he sold my dad the farm. My dad wanted to buy where our existing dairy is. The farm came up for sale, and my grandpa was like, okay, I don't think you should buy the farm. Well, my dad was like, well, I got two sons here that, we were in high school. I was a freshman. My brother was a junior. My brother, at the time, he was born to be a farmer. I'm telling you, he just was. And I think he knew that from birth already. I really didn't know it at the time, but, my heart was somewhat in farming at the time, but yet not totally. But then I decided, it was kind of a condition with my mother being handicapped. I felt the need to stay and help, take care of her. So as time, kind of going on, and from there, Dad goes to FHA at the time, borrows the money to buy the neighbor's farm. This was back 77. Grandpa wasn't ready to sell the home farm. Grandpa comes along a month and a half later after my dad just buys his farm. He says, Bud, I want to sell the farm. And this was a month and a half after he buys the home farm, buys the neighbor's farm, excuse me. January 1st, my dad signs the papers and buys the farm from his dad. So he buys two farms in 3 months' time. And this is coming in high interest rates, which everybody remembers the 80s, right? And everybody had us dead in the water. Well, that was kind of a incentive, I guess, for us to prove people that, hey, we can do this. And we did, we succeeded. And, again, like I say, my dad bought the farm from Grandpa and farmed it for, 25 years, I should say. And, we started renting. And, me and my brother said, hey, we don't want to go down this path the way Dad sold us the farm, the way Grandpa sold him. I don't think it's fair to the next generation to do that. So that's when we just, started to have that conversation. And then we brought Steve in. And me and my wife, Jenny, here, we're people that, I should say, we're the ones that would attend meetings, different conferences and that, and whether it was, through PDPW or, your local Compeer, actually, that had these meetings about transition planning. So we attended a few of those, just trying to get some ideas, which direction we should go. And then with the help with Steve, he kind of assisted us to, a couple of these. And then we reached out to Jared and Al Al Bennett at the time. Is Al still with you yet? Okay. So,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
yeah, so we got in touch with them, and then through our tax accountant, we all kind of, had that discussion, which way, because let's face it, tax planning and that, estate planning, you gotta be ready for that, and you don't want to wait forever to get this, taken care of, and you look at it like Steve said, I was in my 50s, yeah, I was 62, so I was 55, and a lot of people are like, wow, 55, you want to sell your farm already? Well, no, but you want to be ready, because these guys, if they want to get into it, I mean, I look at it, I bought the farm when I was 41 or so. I wouldn't want to buy a farm when I'm 55 years old. I mean, that's me, but that's why we kind of went this direction and just said, hey, we need to start planning and getting something in place, so these guys got the opportunity. You could see their growth as time went on, and hopefully they'll have that same passion that me and my brother had.
So you recognize the complexities of what it would take to be able to move your family farm forward into a next generation that involved you and your brother transitioning to children and eventually non-family partners as well. And so you mentioned working with Steve at Compeer, working with Jared and his team at Ascent. You also mentioned your tax accountant. How about an attorney? You had an attorney your family had been working with. However, were they the right one to serve you in this particular need that you had?
At the time, we thought they were, but I think it was just too complex for him. He didn't quite understand the ins and outs of the whole dynamics of what we were going through. So he advised us to look elsewhere, and he still does some of our personal stuff, but with the help of Jarrett, he reached out to professional advisor that lawyers that actually work with this, and was really helpful. And so we did go a different direction with that, and I'll say that's the one thing with Ascend is they do the what do you want to say, the dirty work, the complexity of the whole transition. So it makes it easier for the lawyers to write up these, it's not all that the people might say, well, holy crap, that's going to cost you a lot of money to have a lawyer do all of this. Well, yes and no. The lawyer really, I should say, dots the I's and cross the T's and looks over, these plans, and between, our lawyer and Jarrett, I think they worked well together, and it made it more of a smoother process.
And Jared, would you like to add something?
Sorry, I was just going to say that, building your team for your transition plan is critically important, because they're going to steer the direction of the plan. Oftentimes, as the business owner, you don't know all the tax laws or the legal ins and outs, and you're just going to take the advice of your team. And there's a lot of amazing professionals that help family farms across the United States, but a lot of them maybe plan with clients year to year. They just don't have the experience to think out many, many years at a time. So if you're watching this or listening and you're building your team, just ask your advisors, what experience do you have working on a transition plan? That's critically important. Your original attorney, nothing wrong, great people, but they wanted to put a strategy in place for the equity part of the transition plan that would have probably cost an extra $2 million in tax over the life cycle of the transition plan. That's real money. That adds up. And so just those little tweaks for most family farms, can have 7-figure impacts.
And that speaks to the value of, in this industry, in dairy, we have particular needs. We have particular ways that transition can be successfully done so that those tax burdens can be bared in different ways. There's different methods, different strategies, and we're going to get into some of that in just a moment. But I want to take a little step back again into these early stages of a process. And there were multiple steps that I know Jared and his team, after Steve had referred them over to you, that they walked you through. And we keep talking about the plan, but I want to go back to that piece of the vision and what it took to get on that same page and to be aligned as a family and what you truly wanted. And that is a big struggle for so many families. You know, the irony sometimes of farm families, and I come from one as well, is you can work next to each other all day long, and you can work in sync, side by side, all day long. You know what the other's doing. You don't even have to say sometimes what that expectation is of your next step when you're planting corn or when you're harvesting. But when it comes to getting down to the heart and core of what you truly want for your future as a family and as a farm, that sometimes is the hardest thing to talk about, even with the same people you're sitting down and having lunch with every single day. And so let's back out a little bit into what it really took to get to that point of being able to build out a plan by drilling down into what you and your family really wanted. And I'm going to refer to Dennis and Jeni and Alan. What was that part like for you?
Oh boy. Lots of conversations, with ourselves, with me and Jeni and Dave and the team, as far as, do you guys really want to, move on, take this on, as seeing, what we've worked throughout the years. I think with those guys working side by side with us, having that understanding of how we are running our dairy, running our business, that was kind of emulating into their whole belief as far as wanting to become an owner at some point. So that was kind of the start, of the process of, okay, are you guys just going to be an employee, or is your vision to be an owner someday? So that's me and Jeni, we have 3 daughters. None of them really, besides one of our older daughter, maybe had a little bit of an interest in wanting to come back, but she decided not to, which is fine. I always said, I didn't build this farm for my kids. I built it for me. If my kids want to come into it someday, fine. I'm not gonna force them into the business. I don't think you should. I think they should want it. And if they have different careers, that's fine. So with these guys that our next generation here, you could see that they have the desire that they want to farm, and I'm hopeful that they want to become owners. But kind of a long answer to your question, to start that process, it's a lot of conversation to get to that point. Is okay, are we going to take this next step to get this plan into place?
And those conversations you found beneficial to have third-party led, correct, by Jared and his team. And really, it was more of an interview process with those of you that are involved day to day, but also, as you mentioned, your daughters that didn't have that passion and ambition to come back to the farm. How were they included in those conversations? What did that piece look like?
Well, we had that discussion, talk that this is the plan that we were gonna road that we were gonna go down with, and they're okay with it. Like I said, they don't have any animosity. I don't think, as far as like, well, Dad, you never really offered it. No, they're fine, with our decision as far as which direction that we're gonna go. Obviously, you set up your estate plan, in accordance with protecting your kids and that, and with their inheritance and that. So But no, I don't know, Jen, if you want to add to anything to that, or?
Well, that's just where it, comes in with the irrevocable trust with bringing the attorney in. You really didn't know how to guide the children that weren't involved in the farm. Where is it fair for them and to inherit not just what we grew up on, but what parts of the dairy would they inherit? And with having an attorney and Jared with the meetings, it really brought you like, wow, I never thought of that. I never thought of it this way. And there is availability at some point that if they do want to come back, and how they would come back, not just thinking like, oh, I'm the owner's daughter, I would come back here. No, you're the owner's daughter, but you're going to work your way back up. So it's all through meetings and question and answer of step-by-step process of how it would come into play.
And how valuable was it? I know we keep talking about having these conversations. You had a lot of conversations before you entered into having Jared and his team help you, but how did that play out? What value did that bring to have someone outside the family start to ask questions on an individual basis to each member that was involved?
Oh, it was Jared brought some, he said it was games. But the personality test and just understanding, working side by side with your husband and your in-laws, brother-in-law and sister-in-law, along with my nephew here, and understanding like, that's why they are who they are, because everybody isn't like you. Everybody does have their own personality, and how do you work through that, and how do you learn from it? And also, when Jared brought in it was probably a 5-page letter, like who does what now, who's going to do it in 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. And everybody had to put their check mark down, like, okay, yep, I'll take over Dennis's job, and Alan's like, I'll take over his dad's job as the herdsman, and what do I do now? And I kind of want to do this in 3 years. And it just really brought out the transition plan of 10 years. Okay, this is going to work. Nobody signed up for my job. Mine was all blank, but that's where I come into Compeer. Like, they do have options for somebody that doesn't want to do the book work and HR and bring in that business aspect of it. So they really gave us ideas on how to transfer it.
No one told you, but you don't get to retire. Yeah.
And I thought those conversations were really critical, because as a lender, I always look at, okay, you're going to transition the farm, but who's actually managing the farm, and how is the management ability going to work? And when you look at between the three individuals, knowing the operation was a dairy operation and cropping, you can't have all the three individuals be crop guys. You can't have all the three individuals be cow guys. You need somebody to be the cow guy, somebody needs to be the crop guy, somebody has to worry about feeding. There's DNR work, there's FSA work that needs to be done, and the book work. So those conversations really allowed me to feel more at ease, knowing that going forward the operation would be in good hands, because they were able to separate those responsibilities. We had people step up and say, hey, I'm going to be the cow guy, I'm going to be the crop guy. So we had a really good mixture, but that's always a big concern when it's easy to say you want to bring next generation in, but who's actually going to do what? Like I said, everybody can't do the same thing. You need some to be specialized in certain areas, and through the interview process, I think we were able to figure out who fit best. They always talk about where do you fit on the seat in the bus, trying to find a person to sit in the best seats in the bus and find the right seat, and it worked out really well through that process. But that's where the interviewing came in and really delved deep into those conversations.
Yeah. And Alan, how did this all work for you? What did you learn and discover and value about this whole process of, having those conversations led by someone else, learning about the personalities within your own family, and starting to be able to really identify the dynamics that you have as a team working together, and to start to designate those roles and have someone leading those conversations? What value did that bring to you as the next generation coming in?
Brought a lot of value. When you talk transition planning and being a young farmer, if you want to say, it's really opened your eyes of you're not just signing the paper and owning the farm, you know. When you brought Jared in and you're doing all this, you know, behind the scenes paperwork and talking to these guys about what the next step is, you know, it's eye-opening, especially when you're running a big operation like that, on the tasks that people are doing. And, you know, if there's multiple successors, you know, who's going to do what, and to make sure that, you know, you want to do this the rest of your life with the people you're surrounded by, whether it's family or long-term employees. You know, I'm not going to lie, at first it was a little scary, but once you get into it, you know, it's like I told Jared before, you know, you got to surround yourself with good people and trust these people that they're helping you, you know, to all have one common goal, and it's to be successful.
Thank you, Alan. And we're going to dig into some nuts and bolts here of kind of this next phase in our process of talking about the actual plan and the how to make everything work. But before we do that, I want to do two things. One is just a reminder again that on your tables are those little tents with a QR code that please just take a moment and scan them, because that will give you full access to the video recording from this presentation after the show, and encourage those that are tuning in online to submit their questions and to be able to access our panelists that we have today. And in fact, I believe we have a few of those questions that have started to come in. And Brian with Compeer, Brian's got a few of those queued up for us.
Yes. We have a two-part question for Dennis. When you talk to your fellow dairy producers, how many of them have plans in place? And secondly, how often do you review your transition plan?
As far as guys that I had, farmers that I talked to, surprisingly, kind of people that I know, and very few of them have anything in place. They talk about it, but they're all kind of on the fence, and not too many that I have talked to have actually put a plan in place. So it's, you know, I try to encourage them, you know, to, hey, you know, don't wait too long, especially if you have, you know, people that are wanting to take it over for you. You know, don't be afraid to get involved, or, you know, to get going with it, because to me, you got to have some type of exit plan. You know, none of us are going to live forever, and we just, you know, if we don't have a plan put in place, what is your plan? The second part, what was the second part?
How often do you revisit your transition plan?
Well, yeah, maybe not. Well, I shouldn't say we do review it. I would say probably monthly, quarterly, that we review, and then we have conversations, obviously, with Jared here. Usually on a yearly basis is when we're reviewing our transition plan and making sure everything is going according to plan, and if there's any changes that, you know, we need to make along the way. You know, it's like Jared said, you know, it's a guideline. You know, it's, you know, yes, we have a written plan, but you are still the owners of it. So if you have the right to make changes. I mean, as an owner, it's still your operation. So, you know, these transition plans are a good guideline, but you know, yes, we do, right? I mean, we do review it on a yearly basis as far as what would ascend.
And Brian, any more questions from the back there?
Yes, we have a question for Steve. Assuming that all farms need a transition plan, how many people do you meet who think that their operation, depending on size, may or may not need a plan? Do they need to be a certain size of operation to do this level of due diligence?
I don't think size really matters in this situation at all. I mean, when you look at transition, and of course the complexity of the plan, how many members you're bringing in does make a difference. But I mean, again, getting back to the idea that the asset base of farms right now is just tremendous. When you look at the value of land and cattle and buildings, really, it doesn't take much to amass $5 to $10 million of assets on any type of operation today. So that's a lot of dollars. So how do we safely and easily transfer that to the next generation without causing financial stress on the surviving or the people that are taking over is very important. So those conversations need to take place no matter what size of operation you're at right now. And again, getting back to the idea, this is a dairy farm, but this plan and this process holds true for cash cropping, any other enterprise of agriculture, not just dairy farming, but every operation needs to have this conversation and talk about. So yeah, there's the size doesn't matter. The plan is good for the process, and plan is good for everybody.
Thank you, Steve. And Brian, any more from the back?
Yes, we have a question. It's not assigned to anyone in particular, but how do you create a transition plan when you can't see profit and loss statements on a regular basis?
I'll take that one. So if you don't see profit and loss statements, that's a good question, and I'll try to keep it short. There's a lot of successors that have no access to the books or the financials of the farm, and it's hard to ask the next generation to sign up for something or take on something if they have no idea what's going on with the financials of the business. And if you're I'm assuming that's the successor asking that question. Hopefully the owner, the senior, has access to their own books. And they need to just, my thought is to be very diligent and share their opinion with the senior generation, saying we need to start understanding this. If you want us to be successful producers someday, we have to understand the intricacies of the business and how it works. Sooner than later is better to start that discussion. I just start with asking the question, and why don't we? Can we see it? Can we be a part of it? Again, come across with empathy, and don't try to come across like you're trying to take someone's job away or push them out. But try to put yourself in their shoes and say, the sooner I can understand the numbers and the profitability of our farm, or lack thereof, the better plan we can make for you, Mom and Dad, to secure your financial security down the road. Okay? So that would be my style and my thought on how to do it. But yeah, if you don't know the numbers of the business, just to be frank, and someone says sign here, I'd walk away. There's no way. How can you buy a business or ask to execute something that you don't know how it's going to work? I would say that's a plan that's not going to work. That's doomed to failure. If there's no trust up front to be able to show the books, that's the whole process it's just not going to work. And I have there are clients that do not want to show the books because they might not know how to interpret it themselves, or they feel that maybe they're not doing it right, and so they don't know what to say. They don't know what to show. So sometimes it's not because they're at fault, or they just don't. They're trying to hide something. I hear that sometimes from the kids. Oh, Mom and Dad are trying to hide something. Usually they're not. Usually they just don't know how to show you.
And really, a part of the process, it's really a two-way street. In your situation, Dennis, you were looking to find out if the next generation wanted to be part of it. They're also at the same time looking to find out, hey, do we want to be part of this operation as well? So it works both ways. I've had some situations where the next generation looks at the situation, the farm, the financial position, they say, hey, I don't want to be part of this operation going forward. So it's really a two-way street, but being open and candid about it is definitely the way to go up front if possible.
And utilize your tax advisor, your bookkeeper, your accountant, an outside party to help interpret the information and bring the people together. So if you're that successor and you don't have access to the books or haven't seen them, say, hey, how about we go into town and go visit with our bookkeeper or our accountant, and let's talk about this together as a team.
And Jared, I know you shared with me in the past as well that what we're talking about really here is part of a series of steps that you take with your clients through Ascent and that you've walked with the Oechsners through as well. And we've hit up these, we spent a considerable amount of time talking about the first few steps, right? Of having those conversations and having those, doing those evaluations within your team, that piece of the process. The next step is what we were just talking about here, and that's that financial feasibility and really taking a look at the bigger picture of being able to transfer or have a plan for what you will do with an asset, but it has to be an asset that has value and profitability tied to it. You don't know that until you are able to really assess those numbers. But once those first couple of steps have been solidified, as we go through this process, right? This is a process that takes time, but that's when we get to that next step of the what do we do next? How do you, oftentimes one of the biggest challenges is how do you help that senior generation retire eventually? And how do you at the same time allow the next generation to be able to afford to buy in at the values that farmland and assets are today? And so I'd like to pivot this conversation to the business benefits of transition planning and again starting early, but let's look at that tax piece first. Tax benefit versus tax burden, and how as advisors and also as a family who has been through this, how did you manage that piece of this puzzle?
You want me to go?
Go for it, Jared. Take it away.
You're the brains of the operation. You're the brains here, so
Well, no.
take off.
The Oechsners were in a unique position because they had non-family successors coming into the business. And that's going to become probably a more common thing in family farms. We're going to have key employees that we want to attract and retain and keep long term. Where I go with this is when we started with the Oechsners, we said, if you have non-family successors, you need to treat this as formal and professional as possible to create clarity. You can't just go to your hired hand and say, oh, we'll figure it out someday. Come on and we'll, it's all good. That works for some families, and that's fine. That's great. And so the Oechsners said, yep, let's do this right. Let's not cut any corners. Let's do this as professional as possible for ourselves and for our successors. Where I go with that is as after the phase one of the interviews and personality assessments, things like that, we spent a lot of time doing budget meetings. Remember that one budget meeting that we had where we spent like all day, it felt like going through, and they already had amazing detailed books. Jeni is down to a penny and she's almost perfect. But anybody seen a Schedule F before, a tax return? Do they show a lot of profit usually? No, you try to run that sucker into the ground, right? Depreciation, deferring income, prepaids. So Oechsners had good books already. They, from like an accrual perspective, that helped. But we sat down and just built out line by line a budget for the farm on what their profitability looks like on a typical year. There's no typical year in farming, but we wanted to understand how the farm makes money year in, year out. What does it do in a good year? What does it do in a down year? What's their capital purchase plan look like going forward? And we tried to be as transparent as possible with all families, seniors and successors, with the numbers so they all understood it. So that way, Alan didn't get to the finish line to sign papers and all of a sudden, sign here and ask questions later. You guys got to see the numbers right away, and we built it with confidence. From there, then, starting into the financial modeling piece to understand if the farm is in a healthy position to do a transition plan. Not all businesses are transition plan ready. It's important to understand that. And if a business is not transition plan ready, what do we need to do to get it ready? The word we use a lot is legacy payments. We got to start making legacy payments to the senior generation as they want to step back and bring the next generation in. Can the business afford legacy payments today? And we spend a lot of time with the Oechsners to understand what those payments had to be to the senior generations to have them achieve financial security. But like you were saying, making sure that there's something for the next generation as well. So building it looking at it saying we got to make sure that the farm can succeed. There's something tangible for the next generation that they can build off of, but that the seniors could step away and meet their personal goals away from the farm, and that they could address the fair versus equal. Is that a topic anybody hears about, fair versus equal? You need to address that early on in the process. And then collaborating extensively with their tax advisor, with Steve, to look at the numbers and say, how is this going to work? And coming up with the right tax strategy. And, Oechsners were not unique in a situation where a lot of farms, you ever heard of deferred tax liabilities? We all have them in farming. You take accelerated depreciation. You work hard to keep your income taxes down at a certain point in time. But if you talk to your tax advisor, they're going to say, well, you got to pay that sometime. And the farms that start this process earlier can work through that tax plan in a much, much more efficient manner. And so we put together a 10-year plan with the Oechsners to become as tax efficient as possible, working closely with their tax advisor, Christina, at Compeer. And then every year it's coming back and looking at that tax plan, and we have actual targets in place every single year that we're trying to hit to get ready for when Dennis and Dave and the families want to do liftoff for the transition plan. So they're doing well, they're beating the plan. It's amazing if you lay out a plan with details and economic targets, now you have something tangible you're trying to reach. And that gives you a goal versus just, well, we'll figure it out as we go. You guys are beating the plan. I think you know that, but you're doing great. So.
What's so unique about transitioning and really most difficult is you can come up with a great plan on how to transition assets over, but if it doesn't work financially, it really isn't a viable plan. And so that's what's the difficult part of transition planning is, unlike any other type of purchase a farm can make, you can buy $1 million worth of land and you're going to have some additional income. You're going to put up a barn and put more cows in it. You have additional income to pay for the debt. But transition planning is almost like taking on some additional debt, but really not changing the income or expenses of it. So I try to teach and educate all my clients to, no matter what you're going to be doing, transitioning or taking on some additional debt or growing your business, always have some options out there that can improve your cash flow. In the Oechsner situation, we talked about some of those options. They had positioned themselves to the point that we could have stretched some loans out longer if we had to increase the cash flow. We could combine some loans if we had to stretch things out and release some payments, which allow for some of these transition items to be easily managed. We didn't have to do those things, and unfortunately, but I always tell my clients, make sure you're positioned at a point where we have some options. If you have options, we can work with a plan, we can be flexible. You don't want to get in a situation where you really don't have any room to maneuver to free up some payments. In this situation, we didn't have to do that, but it's always good to know that is always there in case we have to.
And as much as we can, I would love for you all to drill down into some of the specific ways that Dennis and Jeni and Alan, that you found were successful to do this, that gave you peace of mind and also gave Alan peace of mind for how to really set up and package these tax situations. And I ask this because I get asked these questions on a regular basis, and I know that it's weighing so heavy on the minds of farmers and dairy producers, and what they really want to hear are just examples of what other people have done. Now, I understand every situation is going to be different. Your situation is different, your situations are different, but the best thing that sometimes we're looking for is just a story or an example of something else that someone's done that worked for them. So as specific as you're willing to share with that, what did some of those structures look like for being able to create tax benefit instead of extensive tax burden?
Well, I think, how Jarrett kind of laid it out before, I think if you look at, when you want to transition your farm over here, you could go two ways. Either you set it up for the successors, and obviously you're going to have to probably set it up, as a discount, uh, or you can just turn around and just sell it outright, but you're going to get burdened with taxes, whether it's capital gains or whatever. In the end, when we had discussed this, early on, and that was one of the things that, me and my brother had discussed earlier in our talks, were, okay, if these guys don't want it, well, I guess we're just going to sell it outright. Well, you look at values today, like Steve said, you're looking at land values is exploding to the point where, yeah, you could probably make a killing off of that, but you're going to get burdened with taxes. So are you going to be any further ahead? You look at it as like, where do you see, what is your goals for your farm? Do you want to see that farm be taken over, and that pride of keeping that farm in the family? So as Jared laid it out, with the tax planning, that was kind of the direction that we felt that would be suited best. And again, if knowing that they want that desire to do that, but getting it set up that we are not burdened with all these taxes, at the end of when we're ready to retire. So we can save that, for us.
Thank you. And other things to add, ways that people have been able to do this from the tax side without having the tremendous burden of taxes that have to be paid in, but also being able to allow that next generation to come in. Jared, Steve, what else have you seen be successful with some of the other clients that you work with?
In dairy farming, in farming in general, it's very common to see something happen called debt in excess of basis or negative capital accounts in an LLC or something like that. And basically it means that as a farm, you've taken depreciation or worked your basis down on your assets faster than you have the debt. And that's common because you do it for tax planning and so forth. And to get in an optimal setting, it can take time to get the business massaged enough so that way you can do a transition plan and not have that burden, because the government views it as a tax gotcha. We have a dairy that we're working with on a transition plan, and the dad and mom just wanted to just give the son the farm site, nice farm site, give him the farm site and just ask the successor to take over the debt. The farm site was worth $4 million and the debt was $1 million. What a nice offer, right? And so the parents said, we'll just give the farm, take over the debt, and good to go. Well, you look at it, we said, but Mom and Dad, you're going to owe $700,000 of tax on this transfer. And they go, why are we going to owe tax on this transfer? We're giving it away. It's worth way more. Well, that's not how the government views it. That's not how the IRS views it. He was baffled that he couldn't give his farm away, with some debt attached to it. And so those are the things that can plague of a dairy, is just trying to do a shotgun approach and not thinking it through over many, many years. And putting it in, a plan in place that is going to be more effective. So depreciation recapture is a common thing. Again, we take depreciation against our assets, and the government says that recapture tax is going to be due if you sell something like that. Hot assets. Hot assets are your grain, feed, things of that nature, prepaid expenses, and if you just sell those on an installment sale to family, the government could say, well, you owe all the tax on those hot assets year one. So just little things like that can trigger a lot more in tax. We had a family that went through the transition plan, didn't seek professional advice, and the mom and dad owed more income tax after the first year than they received in payments from the successor, because all the tax for the entire transition plan was pretty much due the first year. So just little things can tweak it and make it a lot better. It doesn't really matter what entity you're in. People sometimes will come right away at the first meeting and say, should we be in an S Corp or an LLC taxed as a partnership? And honestly, that's like the one of the last questions to be thinking about. There's so many things ahead of that to think and to work on. We didn't even start talking about tax for a long time because we had to get the economics, everybody aligned, but it's got to be a part of the piece.
Some of the strategies I see that are out there in the industry, I always tell my clients and even the people that want to join in the operation, try to control the income producing assets of that operation. So we'll see a lot of clients. I'll see a lot of clients they'll split their operation in multiple entities. So the one entity might own the cattle, machinery, and the dairy facilities. So that one entity will just basically have the income producing assets, and then the land might be owned by a different LLC. Again, not to say it's right or wrong, but when it comes time to transition, the first step would be to transition the income-producing assets. So you're not trying to transition everything at one time and then just basically renting the land from the LLC, and over time maybe taking that on. That's a strategy I see a lot. Try to avoid the last strategy that I talk about, and I've seen this in a couple times, and it really gets down to the point where you, again, don't have a whole lot of options and maybe transition too late, but you get in a situation where the tax gets to be such a burden, Jared, that I've had some attorneys tell some clients that, as cold and morbid as it may sound, a death of a family member sometimes solves a lot of these tax issues because you get that step up in basis, and it's easier to transfer stuff over at that time. Again, not saying that's the right plan. That's some plans are out there right now that, as it's the only plan that's going to work. Try to avoid that, but that is, you talk to your tax people and your attorneys and transition people, and that is a plan. It's as cold, as hard as it may sound, but that is a plan. But again, the income-producing assets of an operation and really what the next generation are trying to control first, and then work out from there, whether it be land or other assets that aren't a direct income producer.
Steve brings up an amazing point about the income-producing assets. And I talked about in dairy farming and farming in general, we work hard to keep our income taxes manageable year by year. And it's critically important to align the cash flow of the farm with the debt structure of the farm as well, if you can. Real estate debt, for example, your interest payment is deductible, but your principal payment is not a deductible expense. And we have a dairy that we've worked with where the mom and dad transitioned over all the cows, the cropping to the next generation, but they kept all the real estate debt and all the land, and they're just renting it back. Well, the land payments are hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now mom and dad do not have any of the income or tax planning ability to manage the income taxes. So now mom and dad they're a duck on water on opening morning, for taxes. They're just getting pounded with taxes because they have to take in this hellacious amount of land rent just to go back and make payments to the bank, which is fine. It's good debt, but their income is just through the roof, and they don't have any deductions or any depreciation, any expenses to go off to offset it. So a lot of those situations, we try if we can. If the family is forward thinking, you try to align the land and the land debt with the successor, so that way you can manage the income taxes and keep that tax planning capability together. It doesn't always happen like that, but in certain cases you try to do that. And that's where it's important then to, all the way through the process, but talking intimately with your lender and understanding and saying, hey, what are my possibilities? How does this work? Hey, Steve, if I want to transfer some land to my next generation with the debt, can I do that? Are you comfortable? Those are important discussions all the way through. But again, all of it needs to be thought about versus just in a silo or one thing at a time.
And that also leads to some of those options I was talking about too, Jared. I mean, you talk about the tax situation. So after you delve into a real estate mortgage 10, 15 years, and a lot of its principal, which is not tax deductible, a lot of times we can turn around and reamortize that loan again, maybe spread it out another 20 years. Now we're not doing it for the first generation, we're doing it for the next generation because they have time in their hands. So it sounds kind of crazy to take a debt and amortize out again. But if we do that, it's really the next generation that's servicing that debt. For the current generation, they're going to see a lot less payments, a lot less principal on that loan, and which sometimes can alleviate that tax situation. Again, it's just boils down to having another option out there, and that's why you want to surround yourself with a team to talk about these things, and in case that had to be done, what are the possibilities of that happening, and what are the consequences of that as well. It was easier to do back in 4 or 5 years ago when interest rates were lower, so you could take a really low interest rate loan, re-amortize it out, and continue with a low interest rate loan. You want to have a different conversation today because you might be taking a loan that has a lower interest rate, terming it out longer, and maybe converting it to a higher rate. You may not want to do that, but again, just talk to your advisors and see what the consequences of that would be.
And I can add to that. That was when we went through our meetings with Jared. When we sat down with these were the scenarios that had played out, as far as, were the owners, would we, maintain control of the land and then rent it back to the, and when we looked at that plan, it wasn't feasible to our liking, and, them were the directions, that they led us down.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, Dennis, and also Jared and Steve for just these scenarios and examples. And I think what this also speaks to is just the high value of having that team that has actual experience, not just with farming, but with dairy in particular, that can help guide through these complex scenarios. And I do want to turn our attention for a moment to our audience that's here live with us today in the Tanbark here at World Dairy Expo. And there are mics that are set up in the room here today. So those that might have questions that they would like to stand up and address those, but also our people that are tuning in online. And it looks like Brian might have a few questions coming in from the back. So we will give him a chance to sit down and address those. Brian is the voice like the Wizard of Oz today that you can hear coming from some unknown space in the back of the room. But Brian, what do you have for us?
I have two questions. The first is not necessarily assigned to anyone, but they would like specifics on what practices or processes have been used in transition planning to defer taxes.
To defer taxes?
Correct.
Yeah. You want me to jump on that one? An example that we do a lot, it starts with finding out what the senior generation needs out of the deal, and then kind of backing in a number from there. Where do I go with that? A lot of times our plans will involve gifting over the hot assets. When I said hot assets, it's the feed, it's the crop inventory, it's prepaids. Gifting those over, oftentimes we will gift over the equipment as well, if we can, within reason, but maybe then take elevated land rents, work with their tax advisor and say, hey, can we push the upper limits of the land rents? Could we sign a bonus land rent agreement in place if we are renting for 10, 15, 20 years? Can we get even higher? We have a CPA that said, yeah, we can throw an extra $50 an acre on the land rent. Not a problem, because we have a long-term land lease in place. Great. We met mom and dad's cash flow needs for legacy payments, but we just pushed over the assets and deferred those taxes, and then the next generation can keep the tax plan going in that way. 1031 exchanges on land is a big thing to do if you need to defer capital gains tax on land with low basis. So, that can happen. Deferring taxes in other ways, if it's a equipment transaction where you have to get cash out of the equipment, work closely with the tax advisor. Again, this is not legal or tax advice, but we can put like a lease with an option to purchase in for the equipment over many years. Make sure there's enough residual, make sure the lease payments are, correct and the right amounts. But that's going to keep the income taxes manageable for the senior generation. It provides nice deductions for the successors. So those are some quick ways that are coming to mind just off the top of my head to do that.
Probably some internal notes. You can do some internal notes to defer things out. Maybe land is on land contract, stuff like that, or like you mentioned, rent-to-own situations. Those things can all help too.
Exactly. Most transition plans, if the family allows for it, a lot of it is seller financed. It's internal financing, okay? And that allows for better tax treatment for the seniors. It allows for the next generation not to have to go out and just take on a bunch of debt right away. Oftentimes there's already debt in the business. That's common. So it's working then to have that debt be assumed by the next generation. Work with your lender closely and choose a good lender through this process that will collaborate with you. All of those little tiny things will add up to a significant saving in taxes, and then to defer those taxes at the end of the day.
Thank you. And Brian, more questions from the back?
Yes. For Dennis, did you adjust your business plan based on what you learned while making your transition plan?
I would say we kind of stuck to our guidelines of what we were looking for, within reason. Again, making this all work for everybody. I think you got to be mindful of that, going forward. I mean, as far as what you want, for your buyout. I mean, it's got to work. It's got to work for everybody. So, there was some tweaks along the way.
I know financially, Dennis, we talked about the idea that with this being a 10-year plan, you just can't put your head in the sand and say we aren't going to do nothing for 10 years. You still have to operate a business. Land still becomes available in the area, land either to rent or to buy. You still have opportunities to purchase things, machinery wears out. So you still have to run the business as a business and purchase assets when need to be purchased. But I think you are more mindful of what the consequences are and how the next generation would how that would work with their plan as well. So I think a lot of the conversation is making sure that they're okay with what you're purchasing, making sure what we did wasn't going to hurt the financial position of the farm, which would also affect the next generation. So I think you were more mindful of what purchases to make, and not to say your business plan changed, but you just wanted to make sure it fit the plan of the transition. Not that we didn't want that to hurt the future performance of the farm and for the next generation as well.
Can I give you a compliment? You okay with that? Sure. Okay, I figured you would be. With the Oechsners, they started the plan so early that they have been able to develop a multi-year plan, their business plan, but they know what their legacy payments are to the seniors and when they're going to start, most likely, and have a good idea as to what that's going to look like. That's given the next generation a lot of guidance when they think about expansion or buying land, like Steve said, to lay all that into their multi-year plan, but now they have that piece figured out. I see so many family farms get stalled out because they have no idea what it means for the seniors, what they're going to need out of the business, and they quit investing, they quit expanding, they quit growing because they don't know where the debt's going to be, they don't know what. So mom and dad they get gummed up, they start putting the brakes on ideas because they don't even know what they're going to get out of the business in the future. I think you guys are putting this plan in place so early, it's allowing you guys just to have more fluid discussion. Maybe you don't even know it, but you guys have amazing culture inside your business and communication because you have all those big rocks taken care of. You guys can just have discussions and you can move now versus, well, what does this mean? Because you guys know.
No, I agree 100% with that. And that's what we've been. We're in year 4 of our transition plan, and there was some land that came up for sale after the fact, and Alan and Travis they applied for a beginning farmer loan, and they currently are owners now of a neighboring farm that came up, and that's that's one thing. Like Steve said, you still got to keep running your business and growing, and knowing that these guys are have that desire in this plan, you got to look and you got to be proactive when things like this, opportunities like this come up. So knowing that they want to grow the operation, well, you can't just say, well, we're going to put the brakes on until year 10, and then by then there's a lot of changes that can happen in the industry and in your area.
Absolutely. And Dennis, you just touched on that piece of what could change on the business side. And sometimes it's opportunities that can come up, but there's other things that can change. Family dynamics, death, divorce, other challenges within our own families sometimes that can come up. And I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time talking about this side of the process and planning, because this is another area, Jared, where you and your team were able to really assist the Oechsners in looking at where are the potentials for conflict, not just today, but in the future. And so that included building into the plan some expectations and some foundations for what that could look like. And so can we talk about that for a moment? For example, I know with your situation, there are, for one, family members, non-family members. There's also housing that is on the farm, and that's part of something that was discussed. So I want to start maybe with you, Jared, and just touch on how your team looks for areas of potential conflict and sees where that could go, so that you can then help families like the Oechsners, and we'll hear their pathway of what they built into their plan for those type of unexpected circumstances that could come up, and in some cases be one of the greatest threats to the future of their family and their farm.
Yeah, it starts just by looking at and trying to understand where the risks are for this business, and how do we mitigate those risks as best as possible, and looking at every single opportunity if we can, and trying to understand how do we immunize that or keep that situation at bay. So almost every transition plan that we're a part of has a very detailed operating and buy-sell agreement that clearly spells out if somebody dies, becomes disabled, if they do want to retire, if they have to get removed from the farm, if they decide to leave early, what happens if there is a divorce, what happens in all of those situations. And it has to be built off of the economics of the business. Every single business is different. This is not a time to just use a template or just we're going to do a 5-year buyout if somebody dies or something like that. It has to align with the cash flows of the business. And every farm is different. And so, we looked at with the Oechsners, if we just went scenario by scenario, and we all of a sudden said, okay, Alan, you're dead. What happens? What happens to your role? What happens, with your family, where you live? Oh, lives on the farm. Okay. What happens if Alan passes away, and how long can his family stay on the farm? Is it forever? Do they have 2 days? And so, we just looked at all of those, and then, you build out a housing policy, part of the plan as well, like you said, of who can live in a company housing for how long, what if someone dies, what if they leave the farm, what can they do to the house, what's covered by them, what's covered by somebody else, or by the farm, excuse me. And this is oftentimes a major point of contention in a transition plan. I get it all the time where the daughter-in-law of the farm will call me and say, I've been living down the road for 17 years. I'm told someday I can move to the farm. I'm told to never put any money into my house because we're moving to the farm, but it's always next year. It's always next year. What's the plan? And a good plan addresses all of that, where people are going to live. That's a big piece, and it's an emotional piece, because oftentimes as a farmer you live where you work, and you work where you live. So, but it has to be discussed. It has to be put on the table, and a part of the buy sell and everything else. So oftentimes too, a big point of contention or conflict is compensation. A lot of family farms just will pay everybody the same, and people's roles will change, and that needs to be understood as well. What are people getting paid? What are they worth for their contribution back to the business? So we're not saying there's a right or wrong way to do it, but you have to, as a family, agree to a philosophy and talk about it and have it on the table. These are things that are critically important to just be frank about and be open, because if you don't, all those little things will just compound over time, and it will erode the culture of your business, and it will start hitting the bottom line eventually.
And I think when we talk about conflict, Jared, and try to avoid it, I thought a real important part of your process was when you did the interviews, you not only interviewed the current generation and next generation getting in, you also interviewed the spouses or significant others of those people. And I thought that was a really important part of the puzzle. We can draw the best plan, it works real great, but if the person's significant other or partner or spouse is not agreeable to this, that has some questions, we need to air those on the table right now. And I think that part of the process was really helpful. I've seen many farms being torn apart just because of that fact that the spouses weren't part of the process, or they weren't aware of what was going on, and they felt left out, and they weren't in total agreement with it. And if that was the case, you need to know that up front, and I think that part of the process was really important as well to avoid conflict.
It seems like a family business will work together every day. They can get along great, but it's amazing what is told to a third party that's not part of the family. I'm sure, Steve, you've seen that. It's not saying anything about the Oechsners here at all, but just about in general. Oftentimes they don't share everything, but it needs to be brought up. It needs to be opened up for discussion to just make sure that the family can move in the right direction with the plan.
Thank you, Jared and Steve, for sharing your insights on this topic. And I would like to actually, Jeni, if you don't mind, tap you on the shoulder here, because oftentimes it's the mom, right? It's the mom that has these concerns that are weighing so heavy on your heart and your mind for making sure that the family continues to not just farm together but stay together. And this was a pretty valuable part of the process for you as well, was having this clarity and this structure around something like a housing policy. So could you speak to, for a moment, Jeni, the housing policy or maybe some other pieces of the planning process that really helped you to be comfortable and have peace of mind with things that could have caused conflict and division in your family 10 years from now if you didn't have a structure and a document that put everything in place right now? What were some of those things for you?
Sure. So the first thing, we were very fortunate to, out of the five, my husband and myself, and my brother-in-law Dave and his wife, and Alan and his wife, we all had homes right on the farm. Then the farm across the road came up. We had milkers in there at the time, and we added a different home on the other farm for the milkers to live in, and renovated that home for so we call ourselves G1 and G2. So the three members of the G2, the second member, we renovated that house, so he then had a home. So then the fifth member, the non-family member employee, lived in a home in town that he paid a house payment on. At some point, we wanted him all to be even. So in the meantime, we put so much money into his fund per month to pay his house payment. Then a home came available nearby, and we purchased that. So then he was then able to. So then our next concern was, okay, out of us five, 3 of the wives were not employed on the farm. But myself and my sister-in-law knew, being a wife and wanting versus needs, it all has to come out even to all 5 of us. So then we kind of looked into Jared's, like, what are some other scenarios that you had in transition planning? So then it was, well, you G2, yes, you all work the same, but you've earned that right to have a little bit more. So then, okay, what is the next step? How do we go about doing this? So every year, the farm transfers money into an escrow account through Compeer. G1 is given so much, G2 is given so much each member. And they can use that per year, or they can pile it up for a kitchen expansion or remodeling. So the furnace, the roof, the plumbing issues that have to be done, it's a need that gets paid through the farm. One of the new wives would say, I want new carpeting. Okay, you have so much in that escrow account, here's your new carpeting. So they hand in that invoice to myself, I then pay it, and it gets with a transfer from the escrow account to pay that bill. So it's kind of where that conflict is, nope, we don't have to worry about it, it's taken care of.
Thank you, Jeni, for expanding on that. And how much peace of mind does that give you in knowing that there's a process and a system for the family members for things that, something as simple as new carpet could have caused some major division for some families, right?
Oh, exactly, because, you know, through the years, Dennis and I, myself, have put a lot of money into our home, along with Dave and Cheryl, and, you know, but it's something like we've earned it, you don't want to say, but yet you want to feel everybody is equal. And it can be a conflict, like, you know, because then why should I be putting money into a house that I don't own, you know, for the wives that work off the farm? So then they have that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's a lot of valuable nuggets that especially other moms will relate to, because those are the things that we worry about, right? When we think about the future, and it's not just the business, it's the dynamics. It's not just the goal of a family, of a farm that stays in the family. It's the goal of a family that sits down for Christmas together and wants to be together, right? These are the things that we're talking about that are part of family farm transition planning. And one thing that we didn't get to, and I want to make sure that we touch on this before our time is up this morning. Alan, I'm going to ask you to speak in on this as well. But when we look at G2 that's coming in, so we not only have Alan, who is your nephew, but you also brought in a person who is not a blood relative into the partnership, correct? So let's talk about that for a moment, because this is the direction that I believe a lot of our farms here in Wisconsin, throughout the Midwest, throughout the country will be going, is to look not just within our family, but within those that have a vested interest and a passion to be a part of our businesses for the long term. So what was that like? What was that process like to bring in a non-family member into your generation of partners? And how'd you make it work?
Well, he's been working for us for 20 years, but you gotta, you know, understand everyone's demeanor and attitude, and, you know, be open-minded with that. You know, we all know not everyone's the same, not everyone has the same interests, but like I said, to be open with it, and you know, if you're lucky enough to work with these people for a long time before you start the transition plan, like I said before, to know that everyone's got the same common goal. You know, not everyone has the same interests on the farm, but to know that we all want to be successful, and, you know, before you sign that paper, to know that everyone's invested, and it doesn't have to be family, you know. I mean, like I said, he's not family, but he's been there, and he knows what's expected and goes about his business, and, you know, I don't know, you know, like I said, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be family, you know. And maybe that person hasn't been there for 20 years, you know. The brother-in-law, he's only been there 8. But if you know they're the right people, you know, time's only a number. So you just got to know or make sure that they're the right people for the job.
And how did you make it work from bringing him as an owner? Was there a structure that you put in place? Is it, you know, is it shares in the company? Is it, you know, what does that piece of the pie look like?
Well, without getting too detailed on our transition plan here, as we set this up, right now, currently, G2 has 2% share, if you want to call it, and the owners, myself and my brother, have 47%. So they technically, they're earning their way into the business. You know, I always have to remind myself when we have conversations that it's a team, it's we, it's not I. I get kind of bombarded with that by G2, like, hey, it's we. Although we still are, me and Dave are still the owners of the operation, but you know, we set up our buy-sell agreement, you know, pretty strict, I should say. You know, these guys, you know, these first years of being in the business, yes, we want them to have skin in the game. They're earning their way into the business. I mean, let's face it, in order to get into this business, you got to transition it right. You know, if they want to get out at year 8, they're going to walk away with nothing. That's how we set it up. You know, it's and you have to. I mean, you have to protect what you have. You don't want to lose it all. You know, it's to me, it's like it's a prenup, basically. Protect what you have, and they know that. They knew that signing it. They're fine with that. I mean, that's they're still, you know, gaining that trust, gaining that equity. But you know, at year 10, then that role changes. You know, then we become the minority, if you want to call it, and then they become the owners. But you know, for those 3 guys, they're all unique in their own ways. You know, they all have their strengths, and they all feed off of that. So you know, it helps us. I think both me and my brother, and I can speak for Jeni, but you know, just building that trust in these guys and watching them grow. You know, Jared made that comment on our last conversation. He was blown away by how much they've grown. You know, I think we all do. But you know, for me as an owner, just being able to relinquish a lot of these responsibilities, I know I still have a lot of them, but putting the trust in those guys to be able to develop their skills is huge. And you got to let them. You got to let them learn. And even if they make mistakes, you know, what do they always say? If you didn't make a mistake, you didn't do anything, right? I mean, you gotta grow with that. And you know, sometimes it's hard as an owner. You just gotta say, okay, as long as it's not going to financially burden the farm, you know, you gotta let them kind of, you know, learn from that, and give them some guidance with that.
I think that's been a credit to you, Dennis and Dave, and that's what time has allowed in the plan too. You're allowing the next generation to bring ideas into the farm, and maybe you're not going to use every idea, but you're certainly going to listen. You're allowing them to take on some more leadership skills. You mentioned before you're transitioning, but you're not retired, so you and Dave are still there for guidance, and I think that is important. But you're willing to listen to the next generation. I see so many times where G1 basically has the power and all the control till the very end. You've been willing to relinquish some of that control and power, and not all of it, but give them enough to on their plate that they can grow. And if you need they need guidance, you can provide that. But again, just listening to their ideas, and there's the next generation has maybe different ideas. Some are better, you know, and some you need to try. And I think you've been more than willing to try those things and see if they work.
Well, and you mentioned before, you know, kind of morbid in the case of a death. I mean, none of us are bulletproof. You know, anything can happen at any time. And if you're going to hold back, and I'm sure there's a lot of people's experiences, if you don't let them learn something and something happens to you tomorrow, I mean, these guys are like deer in headlights. You know, what are they going to do? You know, and if you don't give them some trust in there to develop some of their skills and give them that confidence, you know, in the event of something happens, well, now what? Well, I don't think you're going to be as successful. So, you know, I go back to my original thing with my grandparents and then with my dad, you know, kind of throwing it at us, you know, like, okay, I'm selling the farm. Okay, figure it out. Well, we already did. You know, we already had that. He already had confidence in us, but I can't imagine just, you know, waking up one morning and saying, hey, you know, is this what you want? If not, okay, no, what do I do? You know, without having all of them. And And again, you know, surrounding yourself, like Alan said before, surrounding yourself with successful people. I think that's really key out there. It's, you know, you're only going to learn and be better from it.
And to compliment you guys on something else as well regarding bringing in a non-family successor, and I think a good practice with transition planning is allowing the senior generation to come up with a deal that works for them for their transition plan, but then allowing the next generation of successors to decide how they want the equity or the chips to stack amongst them. I see too many times where the senior generation will maybe, you know, it's two families in business and one has 2 kids coming in and the other one has 1 kid, and then, well, that 1 kid has half the business someday and the other 2 have a quarter of the business, and it just creates a lot of animosity, and it creates, in some certain situations that has to be, but the good transition plans that I see happen, they figure out what they need, and then they let the successors, which you guys got to do, get together as a successor group and say, how do we want the equity to lie? How do we want this to work? How do we want the profits and losses to flow? And then they came back to, you know, to the senior generation and say, yep, here's our thoughts, here's where we're at. You know, seniors are still the owners of the business. Do you bless this? What are your thoughts? Give us feedback. But you guys allowed them to have their fingers on some of this too, versus just, this is how it's going to be. And, you know, I think the plans that stick long term is when the successors have had a chance to craft some of it.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Alan, I want to turn to you for a moment here, because you're G2. You're the one coming in, you and your partners. And I'm curious for you, speak for yourself and your partners. What's been the biggest challenge you faced in this process, and how have you overcome it?
I don't know. I think the biggest challenge is, you know, just having that groundwork laid out for you, understanding, you know, that G1, you know, in order for us to be successful, they got to work with us too. You know, it's like Dennis said, you got to, I'm not sure how to, my thoughts. You know, for the farm to keep going, they got to have a mindset on what they want, but also, you know what we want, and to be able to help us reach that goal.
Thank you, Alan. And we are getting close to the end of our time here today. Boy, these 2 hours went pretty fast, but what a stack of talented farmers and talented advisors that we have had right here in the Tanbark today. And what I'd like to ask and invite each of you to do is to just offer a couple minutes of, you know, a wrap up, a key takeaway that you want to leave our audience that's right here in the Tanbark with us today, and those that are tuning in online. And hopefully we'll have a minute or 2 left to field any other questions that we have before we are done here at 11 o'clock. And so, Jared, final thoughts from you specifically on setting up for successful transition for family farms.
Final takeaways on that: embrace it, enjoy it. If you have a family farm that has gotten to a point where you are able to go through a transition plan, you're beating the odds. You're beating the odds. You've done a lot right, and it should be viewed as a sign of success. So I just hope that family farms watching this embrace that, and you know, work towards it with happiness and bliss, and with open arms, and are willing to think about things and be creative, and try to just remember that at the end of it, we got to be a family, and we want to get together at Christmas. That's a big thing. So it's a business, but it's still personal. Keep that in mind and start early and keep working at it. It's never something you did one year. It's a part of your business going forward. That's just you're always doing, kind of like planting or harvest, and it has to be thought of that way in my opinion.
Thank you, Jared.
Yeah,
Steve?
on my end, just start the conversation. I mean, that's probably the most difficult part. Be willing to have the conversation, talk about it. If it leads to the next step, that's fine. If not, at least you've talked about it. But get everybody involved. Let them know your feelings. Have them know your feelings, and that way you can build a plan. You know, in this situation, actually, the perfect scenario it basically occurred. They got the farm transition with a plan. It'll be over a number of years. Yet, in the meantime, the farm can still grow and expand at the level that Dennis and Dave want the farm to expand, and also at the level that the next generation wants to see it expand as they take it over. So, to me, that's the perfect scenario. That you never want a scenario where it's you don't want winners and losers. You want both winners. And I think the way they set it up here, there are winners on both sides here, and they've set it up for not only for Alan and his partners to grow. It's when their kids and their next generation want to take it over as well. So those wheels are in motion, right, for the next generation as well too. So it can just kind of keep rolling on, and maybe you're talking 7, 8, 9, 10 generations of this farm, and I think that's kind of what everybody's goal was, to keep it in the family, and by talking and planning ahead of time, I think that's something that's able to do.
Thank you, Steve. And Dennis, Jeni Alan, final thoughts.
Okay. I would like at this time, Jeni, would you just stand up a minute? I want you, this was turn around. I want everybody, this is our mission statement, guiding our future to preserve our past. And there's a lot of meaning in that. We all work hard in this business, and in the passion that we have, your core values and your mission statement, that's what it's about. Keeping the legacy going. And if I have any advice to people that ask, it's I go back to saying, don't wait too late, and have a plan. Have an exit plan. What your goals are. If your goal is to stay farming your whole career, great. I mean, there's a lot of people that, if that's your passion, or if you want to retire and walk away and golf and fish or whatever it is, but to have a plan, and be open-minded with it, and with your wife and your kids, and in this case here, the next generation. So I think we've built a legacy, and hopefully we can continue that moving forward here, and the help with our team here, with Steve and Jared and everybody and I want to really emphasize Compeer. We've been working with Compeer for before it was Badgerland Financial, and just the team of people that they have to work with is just, it's such a peace of mind. I don't want to go on too lengthy here. Jared tells me I talk too long, but from our lenders to our crop insurance, dairy specialists. I see Amber sitting in the room over here. Tax planning, accounting. I mean, they're top notch, and it's so nice that you can work with the team. It's all like it's in house, and you don't. It's just a good fit. And Jared, working with Compeer, it's very comforting.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis, for sharing those comments on behalf of your family. Alan and Jeni, anything else to add?
I'll just share with you when we met with Jared and kind of gave us some ideas to set up that mission statement, and also it's listed on our advertising, along with in our break room, and our 5 core values, and just really what every member kind of had to put a word or a thought out there, what our farm is, and what they wanted to continue to be. And so the first one is integrity. And the meaning for that from that employee was strive to do the right things. Next is innovation. Challenge yourself to meet the needs for your team, not just yourself. The growth, have the drive to continue to prove yourself and the business. Accountability, be responsible for what you do every day of the year. And then at the last is perseverance. Continue to strive for improvement through difficulties, failure, and opposition. So that was probably our strongest one, where the difficulties, you never know what you're going to encounter through life. Where we had the death, tragically, of our mother-in-law, the backbone of our business, in a car accident, and you didn't have time to prepare. We had the divorce in the family. You didn't know what was going to come out of it. And we all know what Mother Nature can be from year to year. And to have that next generation understand through the books, through crop failure, through tornadoes, what can happen. And we've had the diseases that came in through the farm, how that can bring in. So it's all these little things that can really put these 5 core values to work and to get you through problems.
Oh, Jeni, thank you so very much for adding that. And once again, integrity, innovation, growth, accountability, and perseverance. And that's what we see with the 3 of you and what you represent, and the way that you not just do your business every day, but the way you're setting it up for preserving that for the future as well. And we have maybe a minute or two before our time here in the Tanbark is done today. Brian, do you have a last minute question you'd like to share with us?
No, not at this time.
All right. Well, with that, since we are just about to that 11 o'clock mark, what I would love for you to do is just join me in a thank you to Jared Holt with Ascent Financial, to Alan, Jeni, and Dennis Oechsner, our family farm that was so gracious to share their time and their story with us this morning, and Steve Schwoerer with Compeer Financial, as well as Compeer for sponsoring this event, for giving you the opportunity to be here with us in person, and also for doing the live streaming, where you'll be able to make sure you scan those QR codes on your tables and get this full recording. And if you aren't already following Up Level Dairy Podcast, make sure that you take a minute to pull out your phone and follow Up Level Dairy Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, so that you can see some of this coverage in the months to come as well. And so please join me in thanking our guests today and Compeer Financial for this Tanbark Talk.